quilter friends. Well, our QQ mystery quilt is coming to an end. This is our last step and would be adding 4.5-inch borders to the outside edges of our newly completed center top of our quilt. The best tips that I can give you for adding those borders would be to measure actually 3 times. So the first thing you'll do is add those side borders under your quilt. You're going to measure at 3 different intervals from the top to the bottom of your quilt in 3 different sections. You're then going to take the average of those 3 sections. For instance, if they're going to measure 57.5 inches, 57 and 3/8 inch, 57.5 inches, we're going to choose 57 inches, and we're going to cut 2 borders to that length. And again, you'll want to measure your quilt. I just did an estimate by glancing down at this measurement after they've already been sewn on. But you'll measure it 3 times and cut the side borders to that length and sew them on with a 1/4-inch seam. I then press the seam allowance to the outside edge. You're going to do the same thing to sew the top and bottom quilt or border on by measuring in 3 different intervals, walking down the quilt to get an average, including the previously sewn 4.5-inch borders on either side of the quilt. This will give you a nice square quilt, and will give you the measurements you need to be able to keep it as close to square or rectangle as possible. Another tip that I'll give you is when you pin and put these borders on, when you take them to the sewing machine, after you've pinned them on, if you have a little bit of fullness on one side or the other of the quilt, you'll want to lay that side that has a little bit of fullness on the bottom above the feed dogs and let your feed dogs help ease that in so that it will, again, come out nice and square. Now, I chose to change up my border a little bit and add a directional print to this border, to this quilt, because I thought it gave it a little bit of life. A lot of people are nervous about mitered corners, and I want to show you a simple way to add a mitered corner to the quilt. When you measure your quilt, you are then going to add to each one of the 4.5-inch strips. So you're going to add to that measurement another 4.5-inch strip. Excuse me, 4.5-inch strip. You're going to add 9 inches to that strip. So 4.5 on one side, 4.5 on the other. You're also, I'm going to scoot a little closer to the camera. When you stitch these borders on, you are going to start and stop a 1/4 inch away from the corner. So you're going to start a 1/4 inch in and a 1/4 inch in, so that you don't take it all the way to the edge. You're going to walk in a 1/4 inch, sew down one side, walk in a 1/4 inch, sew down the other side. Okay? Then on your rotary cutting mat, we're going to fold the top of the quilt kind of at a triangle and match up these borders. See how I've matched them up nicely. My 4.5-inch outside border, I'm going to take that and make sure I move both sides up, and you can add a little straight pin to that to kind of hold both of those seam allowances up, because we don't want to get them in the way of the 45-degree angle that we're going to mark. You take the rotary cutting ruler that has a 45-degree angle, and we're going to lay this. I always have to think about this for a second. I've got the 45-degree edge along the bottom of my quilt, and I'm going to scoot the angle over to right where it meets at the stitching line. Okay, so I've got 45-degree angle here. I'm going to take that out to the corner, and then I'm going to take a fabric marking tool and mark that seam allowance. As you can see, I've marked that seam allowance. Then I'm going to add a couple of pins. Take that over to my sewing machine, and I'll start at the stitching point here at the top, back stitch into it, and then stitch out, and then back stitch at the end. And when you do that, see if I can find one here, you will have a lovely little mitered seam allowance. As you can see, I have stitched from the point out. I've used my rotary cutter and ruler, trimmed that seam allowance to a 1/4 inch seam allowance, pressed it to one side, and you can see how that presses just lovely and adds a nice little added easy peasy 45-degree angle, and all you need is a ruler that you've already got in your collection. Just my tip would be to sew from the point out, press that flat, and you are good to go. I think these quilts turned out absolutely beautiful, and can't wait to let you know what Kathy and I have in store for the next QQ Mystery Quilt. Thank you for joining us. I hope you've had a great time, and we'll look forward to another new mystery with QQ.